Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another nefarious episode of The Gold Standard with Alan Mosley. And here's your host, Alan Mosley.
Now, our guest might take exception to the fact that this is a nefarious episode of
nefarious.
Okay.
Wait. When did it become nefarious? Because I've been on here before and it wasn't nefarious before.
Hold on. Hold the hell on, Mike, for just a second. I got to pull you up because haven't even done our intro yet. And you're already bitching. You're already bitching about the episode. We haven't even started. So anyway, for people at home, you started. So today's guest is making his 18,000th appearance on the Gold Standard out of 28 episodes.
Yeah,
but 29. This is the 29th episode.
Yes. We're almost 30.
Is the National Communications Director of the 10th Amendment Center is Mike Maharrey. Mike, welcome back to the show.
Mike.
Wait, can I talk now?
No, actually, you know what? I'm glad you asked. No, you can't. Give me 5 seconds. If you want to follow us on social media, it's facebook.com/TGS Alan Mosley. My Twitter is @AlanMMosley until we get deplatformed. And you really don't have to do any of that because our website is thegoldstandardpodcast.com. Mike, welcome back to the show.
Hi, Mike.
Thanks for having me on. I feel like I'm basically a co-host now. So.
Hey, you're one of us.
I'm waiting for my name to go on the banner.
Yeah. Well, we only have the mission accomplished banner. That's the only banner we have.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. So, Mike, the reason why, if people at home are thinking, wait a minute, that grumpy Santa-looking guy has been on the show recently, what's he doing back? It's that you've had a major thing going on in your life for months now. It seems like it's never ending. And we've actually never gotten around to talking about it on the show. And I'm going to show people at home real quick. We see you watching Lexington.com, which is the website for, I'm going to let you describe it in great detail, but it's involving surveillance cameras in and around the city of Lexington in Kentucky, because that's where you're from. Mm-hmm. So I want you to kind of give us the few-minute overview of exactly what the deal is with the surveillance cameras and what your connection to that is, and then we'll dig into it.
Cool. So this all started, it's been over a year ago now, and the catalyst for the whole thing was they put some surveillance cameras in the skateboard park that's right here in my neighborhood. Mm-hmm. And as you mentioned, I'm the communications director for the 10th Amendment Center, and surveillance has been one of the focus issues that I've been working on for about 2 or 3 years. So I saw these cameras go up, and it was kind of one of those red flag moments. You start seeing surveillance, that's the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot more going on underneath. So I decided, I've been doing this activism with the 10th Amendment Center, which is really more legislative type of stuff. Mm-hmm. We've talked about doing local boots on the ground activism, and I decided, right here in my town, I've got surveillance cameras. I need to do something. So I created this little organization called We See You Watching Lexington, and the goal is to create transparency and oversight for any surveillance programs that operate in the city. And so that's the big picture. The interesting part, what really made it interesting, I guess, is I did an open records request early on trying to find out, hey, what other types of surveillance is going on? We know that there's these cameras in the park, but what else is there? And I found out that the Lexington Police Department has 29 mobile surveillance cameras. Now, you're probably asking, Mike, what is a mobile surveillance camera? And I'm going to tell you, I have no idea, because they won't tell us. It's a giant, great, big secret. It's a secret to the point that they have sued me to make sure that they can keep it secret. And why did they sue me? Well, it's a weird quirk of the open records law here in Kentucky. I initially appealed to the Attorney General, and the Attorney General found in my favor, said the police department was using basically BS to not release these documents on these cameras. And at that point, the police department sued me, got served right here in my own home. And so they're trying to overturn the Attorney General's opinion. So that's the long and short of it. I'm being sued for asking questions by my own city. I'm paying for my own lawsuit because, I am a taxpayer here. And, the cameras as of now are still secret.
So when date-wise was when you first requested the open records?
I want to say it was probably July of last year.
July.
So the cameras turned up in the park in June. I did the open records request in July.
So this whole saga to today, because we'll do it piece by piece, but from the beginning to today, it's been a little over a year now.
Yeah.
That from when you first said, "Hey, look, I noticed cameras. You know what? I'm gonna request the open records." Now tell us just real quick an open records request. I mean, is that something that you would say is rare amongst journalists or even citizens for that matter, or is that a fairly standard thing? Like a request gets made, the records get released. It's it's not a big deal.
I don't. It's hard to say. I mean, there are a lot of open records requests. Journalists do them all the time. When I worked at the TV station here in Lexington, I mean, they probably did 2 or 3 open records requests a week. It really depends on what you're looking for. I mean, a lot of stuff, the various government agencies will turn it right over. And it depends on your state. Kentucky has a pretty liberal open records law, which by liberal I mean good. There's not a lot of things that they can keep secret. Where you start running into trouble is when you get into things that involve police or investigations, those type of things, and then they hide them behind the good old Homeland Security exceptions, and in the case of these cameras, officer safety. So that's where you really start running into roadblocks. Now at the federal level, like I did a TSA open records request, and it took them like 2 years. Like I had forgotten I had done it, and then I got the open records that I asked for. So, it just really depends on the government agency and what you're asking for.
Now, considering that we're talking about a specific issue dealing with specifically Lexington, Kentucky. So we're not talking about Washington D.C. or New York or anything like that. Not that I'm belittling Lexington, Kentucky, but did you?
Feel free.
Oh, okay. Well, did you anticipate even a slight amount of the type of issues that have arisen since you made that request?
I expected to be denied the documents initially. Mm-hmm. And I expected to have to go to the Attorney General. That was pretty much, I think that's pretty standard. I did not expect to get sued. I figured that once the Attorney General said, you're full of crap, Lexington, give him the documents, I figured that would be the end of it. You can ask my wife, we were actually sitting watching TV, that we get a knock on the door, and I open the door, and here's a constable. Mm-hmm. I'm like, I've got papers to serve you. I'm like, why?
Yeah.
And so, so I've got this lawsuit, and I'm sitting here on the couch looking at it. I'm turning to my wife, and I've said, the city's suing me over this open records request. First thing she says is, oh, how much is this going to cost us? Budget conscious. But it is. And, that really goes to part of the point. This is clearly a bullying tactic, or it was initially a bullying tactic. They even put in the lawsuit that they wanted me to pay their legal fees. Now, how absurd is that? I'm paying for them anyway because I'm paying their salaries. Yeah. But and the interesting thing about that is that in an open records case, they're not even allowed to ask me for court costs. Mm-hmm. They just put that in there so that I would look at it and go, oh, my God, if I pursue this, I could be out a lot of money. And so what it really was, you know what, we're going to sue this guy. He'll go away, and then we won't have to give him the records. And, fortunately for me, I had some connections, and I have a little bit of knowledge of the system, and I'm very stubborn. So they kind of picked the wrong dude to sue. So, bully on them.
Now, you were talking about, appealing to the Attorney General. What's the name of the Attorney General there?
Steve Beshear. He's a gooberhead, but
yeah. Well, I guess my question about that specifically is how common is it for once it has wound up on the Attorney General's desk? Because we talked about this a little bit before the show in a totally different context. I think most people don't know or don't care about most things until it affects them or winds up on their desk, and they're like, "Oh, great, I have something else to do today." How often is it that once the Attorney General has said his piece and said, "You know what, guys, back off. He's in the right. Do what you're supposed to do. I don't want to hear about this." How often is it that it comes back to him where he was rebuked and they're refusing to go by his word? Is that common at all, or is it more that usually when the Attorney General says, it's over?
I really don't know. I know that, like I said, I'm a journalist by training. I worked for 5 years for a TV station here in Lexington. We did countless open records requests. I can't think of too many that even went to the Attorney General level. We never got sued. Now, there had been a couple of high-profile cases here in Kentucky involving the University of Kentucky and some things, some sexual harassment type of things, that there were some lawsuits. And I know it went past the Attorney General level and went to lawsuit. But I don't think it's terribly common, but I really don't know. I mean, I think it's interesting that I don't think this happens I think very rarely does this happen with an ordinary person. Well, first off, ordinary people aren't making a whole lot of open records requests. And in the second place, I think that if they are sued, it never goes past that point because, again, who has the money and the time? Normal guy. Who has the money and the time to pursue a lawsuit that is now, the suit was filed in October, and now we're into August, and going into the Court of Appeals now. Normal people don't have time to deal with that kind of thing. So the system itself is stacked in favor of the government in this case because it can pretty much crush any normal system. Now, if you're a newspaper or a TV station, then yeah, you've got the resources to fight a lawsuit. But for your average Joe, your average citizen, the way the system is, at least here in Kentucky, is kind of jacked up in terms of being stacked by the government. Of course, it was created by the government, so it's no surprise that it favors the government, right?
Let me ask you a couple more things before we move to like the next part of the story.
Sure.
So kind of going after the whole Attorney General statement. So he makes his statement. They basically rebuke him that constable shows up at your door. You've got a summons because you're being sued over this. And you had mentioned that in there, they're trying to intimidate you, and they say that, oh well, you're gonna be held for the court fees and their costs and everything, which you said that's not in their purview to do, that's not allowed, but they put it in there anyway because they're trying to intimidate you. It seems to me, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, or when you first read that and learned about it, it seems to me that on the one hand, it's clearly an intimidation tactic, but on the other hand, it seems like if they know that they're playing fast and loose with the rules, that they know that they could be potentially setting themselves up for an embarrassment, because if they do run into the wrong person, I don't know how much research they did on Mike Maharrey before they filed it, but I mean, could you imagine them, I'm not a lawyer, but imagine if I was a hotshot lawyer and no one had looked me up in the phone book, and then they sue me, somebody who would know full well how to handle it and what my rights were and all that. I don't know. It just seems like that obviously we think they're doing the wrong thing all the way around, but it seems like to compound the issue of doing the wrong thing, they're setting themselves up for failure by trying to curtail the law and just making statements that aren't true. And because I mean, could that do anything other than jump up and bite them in the ass, I guess is what I'm asking.
Well, I'm going to, not to disparage the fine public servants here in Lexington,
Thank
Kentucky.
goodness, yes.
But the entire process that they have gone through has been shoddy and sloppy. Mm-hmm. The appeal that they made to the Attorney General was sloppy, which is part of why they lost. Their initial case that they brought in the hearing, so basically the process of this went, we had a hearing, and then the judge ruled in my favor. Then the city went back to that same judge and asked for what's called a reconsideration. And basically it was like, no, please, really, we mean it. Please don't make us give up these documents. And then at that point, the judge again ruled in my favor. So basically, we're on number 3 win for me. And so now they've given notice that they're going to go to the Kentucky Court of Appeals. So that's kind of the process but every step of the way, they've had to backtrack. They've made some mistakes. I'm not a lawyer. I really think I probably could have made their case better than they have. Mm-hmm. So I really don't think that they put a whole lot of thought into this going into it in the first place. I don't think they really considered it. I really don't. I don't think that there's a high level of competence, and I don't think it ever occurred to them that somebody might push back and fight them. And it really, here's the thing, for somebody who went into this with the goal of doing activism, This is the best thing that could have happened to me.
Yes.
Getting sued is the best, because I guarantee you that if I had not been sued, nobody would have paid one bit of attention to We See You Watching Lexington. It's just surveillance isn't an issue that, at least in this community, doesn't generate enough pop for there to be any interest. We don't have any real strong clashes between various groups in the police department. Everybody loves our police. So nobody would have paid attention to me until I got sued. Now that I got sued, I got people all the time saying, wait, they did what? And I've been on the radio, I've been on the television, I've got the support of the newspaper, I've been able to publish an op-ed. I've actually had the newspaper publish an op-ed in support of me. So, and then the fact that I work for the 10th Amendment Center makes it even more fun because I've been able to make it a national issue. So now Lexington is in the national news for hiding documents. The Electronic Frontier Foundation actually named Lexington its courtroom bully of the year last spring for suing me. So, and here's the thing. I mean, for me, at this point, I've lost 3 rounds. I'd say, you know what? I've lost 3 rounds and I've gotten a whole boatload of negative publicity. I'm just going to give the dude the documents and maybe he'll go the hell away. But no, we're going to go to the Court of Appeals. So,
Yeah. Well, so let me back up a second because I mean, this has gone in front of a judge. The judge ruled in your favor, and then they asked for a reconsideration, which I had actually I've been following your case for a little while, and we just never talked about it on the show before. I had never heard of that before this case. Because I had never heard of such a thing as asking a judge for a reconsideration, but I don't know how common that is, but it just sort of strikes me as odd. I don't know how often that tactic is actually successful, but it seems to me that you're basically telling the judge, we think your ruling is shit and we want you to do it again, because that's totally going to get the judge on your side, by the way.
Right.
And B, can you give us some basic overview of what is their argument? So in the original case and then in the reconsideration, so what new things are they bringing to light to support their cause?
Okay. So basically, like I said, in their first answer when they first appealed to the Attorney General, their argument that they brought up. Okay, so let's back up and make sure people are clear on kind of the process. There is a very sophisticated and intricate body of open records law. And there is a huge set of statutes that basically say these are the documents that have to be public, and these are the kind of documents that you can hide. Mm-hmm. In order for the government to hide any document, to keep it secret, they have to establish a case under one of those exceptions, okay? Mm-hmm. So they can't just say, well, we don't want to give this up. There has to be a statutory exception. So they picked 2. The first one that they picked was Homeland Security, that it could, jeopardize Homeland Security if we know about these cameras. So the terrorists are going to get us. And then the second thing was that it could jeopardize officer safety. But the interesting thing about it is that that's a pretty narrow definition under the statute, and it really only applies to investigatory documents. So it basically allows the police department to hide things that are specific to a specific investigation, and because it could jeopardize officer safety. So in other words, you wouldn't want documents released that revealed the name of a confidential informant.
Yeah.
Okay, so that makes sense. They're trying to apply this more broadly, so that basically they're arguing that if we know about these cameras, and if the bad guys know about these cameras, then they're going to know that they exist, and that's going to make it more dangerous for the officers that are using these super secret cameras. So they're supposed to be hidden cameras, mind you. So apparently they're not very good at hiding them or something. I don't know. So that's the 2 statutes that they're trying to operate on. They pretty quickly dropped the Homeland Security. That was clearly bullshit. And the part of the problem is they've never made a concrete case where they can say that this would jeopardize officer safety because of X. Yeah. And you have to be specific. The burden of proof is on them. Instead, they've just been saying, well, it's going to jeopardize officer safety. And under the law, they have to explain why. They have to give a compelling reason, and they've not given any reason. Just saying it's going to happen is not a reason. That's basically the point that the judges made.
Yeah.
So, what they did with the reconsideration. You can ask for reconsideration. It's statutory. There's a narrow set of things that they can ask for. What they wanted to go in private and show the judge some of the technical aspects of these cameras to prove that they would jeopardize officer safety. He said, really, there's no reason to do that. Broadly speaking, this is just not applicable under the statute. So what they were really doing was they're setting it up for the appeal. So they can go to the Court of Appeals and say, well, the judge wouldn't look at our cameras. That's what they're doing.
Yeah. So one thing I take away from that I think is interesting is I certainly don't have my heart warmed very often when it comes to dealing with the state or the court system in any way. But it sounds to me like the judge in this case was spot on when he's saying, well, look, guys, you're just failing. Like I'm not saying as an absolute that there's no concern. What I'm saying is that the burden of proof is on you to demonstrate your case, and you've done such a shitty job that you've left me no choice but to rule against you because, again, as you pointed out, if there's a certain criteria of specifics that are necessary, I mean, obviously you and I don't want to go down a really long goat trail, but you and I would be exactly the kind of people that would say we don't want to live in a world where because of the Patriot Act or Homeland Security or whatever, that if you just throw the words Homeland Security or terrorism on the wall, they just instantly stick and then you can just pass whatever you want, get any ruling you want. But that actually did not happen in this case. So bravo for that. That did not work. I don't know these people. I don't know what's in their heart, but it almost seems to me like they. And tell me your assessment on this before we move on to the potential appeals and some of the things on your website. Does it feel like to you that there's even a modicum of genuine concern on their part, or is it just that they're doubling down and tripling down because they're the state and they got to win?
That's my gut. Yeah, I think they put themselves in a position where they have to dig in their heels because they've made this case that, in the last hearing, which was the reconsideration hearing, the lawyer for the city actually said it would not only jeopardize officer safety here in Lexington, it could jeopardize officer safety all over the entire United States. So when you ratchet it up to that level of hyperbole, it's really, really hard to back it down. It's hard to say, okay, well, we were just kidding about that. And let me say this, clearly on its face, it's a ridiculous argument, okay? You have surveillance cameras, and here's the argument they used. They said, okay, let's say that the camera is disguised as a rock. If the bad guys know the camera is disguised as a rock, then they'll be looking for rocks. That was kind of the argument they used. That's ridiculous. First off, if you have half an ounce of sense, you know that the police department has surveillance equipment. Yeah. You know they have hidden wires and hidden cameras and all kinds of stuff. You know that if you're a bad guy, right? So if you're meeting somebody on a drug buy and you're the least bit suspicious, you're patting down and you're looking around. So if these cameras are worth 35 cents, even if they know it might be disguised as a rock, surely to God it doesn't look enough like a fake camera. Surely it looks like a rock, right? Yeah. You see what I'm getting at?
Yeah.
And it's just ridiculous to say that, broadly speaking, if we know that they have a rock camera or a pin camera or whatever, that's going to jeopardize officer safety. Let's be honest, if you're an undercover officer, you're putting yourself in jeopardy anyway. It's a dangerous job. And this idea that we're going to keep all of this stuff secret, and it's not just that, we don't want to just know what the cameras are for the sake of knowing. What I'm really trying to get at is I want to know, what criteria do you have around their use? Have you made provisions for storing of data? How do you share this data? How do you redact innocent third parties that get caught on your cameras? Do you have cameras that you're using to surveil crowds? What are the parameters around these things used? And I tell people this all the time. We should not be having this argument now. We should have had this argument before the police department started using this surveillance equipment. They should have come to the city council and say, hey, we want to get these super secret cameras. This is how we're going to use them. These are the policies that we're going to use. This is how we're going to protect. We should have had this discussion. And then the council could have approved it or not approved it based on the plan that they had, and everybody could go on their merry little way, and the police could protect us like they're supposed to, and I wouldn't be getting sued. So this argument shouldn't be happening. So in this little bit of chance that it really might jeopardize officer safety if I know the super secret surveillance cameras, we should have already had this discussion.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. I want to move on real quick. Again, to remind people, the website where they can find out more about your case and the whole shebang is WeSeeYouWatchingLexington.com. But I want to kind of combine two into one really quick. So you had written a very eloquent, very well worded open letter to the city council members, as well as one to Mayor Jim Gray. So what has been the response from any of the public leaders there in Lexington about your case?
That's a short answer. I'm done.
Yeah. So you're being ignored.
For the most part, yeah. And so here's and people can take a look at the open letter. I won't go completely into it, but it dovetails with what I just said about we should have had this discussion before. Mm-hmm. What we're pushing for is an ordinance that would require the city council, or that would require government agencies to have this kind of beforehand approval for a surveillance plan before they start using surveillance technology. So, before we start getting Stingray devices and license plate readers and social media monitoring software and facial recognition and all this stuff that's out there, before we get that, let's have a policy in place, an ordinance that requires a government agency to get approval of a surveillance plan up front. That's what we're trying to do. That's what we're trying to get the council to consider. And pretty much there is not a lot of interest. Now I'm gonna call out one council member. Her name's Angela Evans. She has been the one member of the city council who has been consistently good on surveillance. Mm-hmm. When I went back and watched the hearing that they had when they presented the idea for the surveillance cameras in the park, and she was the one person that raised the privacy issues. So, and Angela Evans has responded to my email. We've been in contact off and on through this process. I think the problem she faces is that she's pretty much by herself. Yeah. And how much political capital you're going to waste on Mike Maharrey. I wouldn't waste any. So, yeah. So I will say that Angela has been solid on this, and if you're in her district, I would vote for her if you're in Lexington, and I don't really vote, so there's that. But pretty much other than that, we've not gotten any. We've gotten a superficial reply from another council member, and I won't go into that, and then utter silence from everybody else. And I've tried multiple times to contact my own city council member, the person who supposedly represents me. His name is Preston Worley. And Preston, I put Preston on a milk carton. I've also put Mayor Gray on a milk carton because Mayor Gray's completely ignored us as well. So yeah, these guys are MIA. And, this is what's sad. Obviously, this is an issue. If it's to the point that the city's wasting however much money it's costing them to sue me, mm-hmm. It seems like somewhere in their heads they would think, maybe it wouldn't be a bad idea to have a process in place so this doesn't happen again. Because I will tell you right now, I'm not going anywhere. And I will keep doing open records requests, and I will keep asking for this information from the police department. So you're going to have to keep suing me. Yeah. So, well, yeah.
Let me ask you this, backtrack in just a second. I forgot to ask you this. So who do you have anyone, or who do you have who's helping to represent you in court?
Yeah, the ACLU of Kentucky is my legal representation. So yeah, they've been fantastic. And I know a lot of people out there, especially if you kind of lean to the right, you're going, "Oh, the ACLU, they're awful." And yeah, they're awful about a lot of things, but those folks are really, really good on surveillance. We've been working with them for several years with the 10th Amendment Center on privacy issues. So, kudos to them, and kudos to them for stepping up, and they've provided top-notch legal representation. They're really, really good. So,
well, that's great. Well, I mean, it's one little silver lining there. Yeah. So let me ask you another thing, kind of looking at the broader picture here. So you had mentioned already that, if they had just given you the records and there was relatively little juicy content there, this would have gone away more likely than not. The people who were interested would have read it. The people who weren't wouldn't have, and that would have been the end of it. But because you were sued, it's become it was a local issue, then a regional issue, and then now a national issue, and it's been written about in various different publications, and locally and nationally. And you've been on a number of programs, but you were on I forget the name of the station. Was it WVLK? Is that it?
That is correct.
Okay, so you were on a talk show on WVLK to come on and discuss your case and why we need government transparency, kind of more the broader philosophical issue, I would think, more than that specific case. And you were met with some what's the word some spirited resistance on that point. Tell us about that.
I was. In fact, I would almost term it an ambush. Mm-hmm. It was interesting. I've been on this show twice previously, and the host, who's normally relatively friendly, so it's your typical talk radio audience, mm-hmm. leans really heavily right. You're going to have a lot of support for police and law enforcement on the show in the audience, and the host shares that. So when we've interviewed, he's thrown out some devil's advocate questions, which were reasonable. We had pretty good mm-hmm. discussion. This third time that I went on was actually a guest host, and he emailed me and said, "Hey, I'd love to come on." It was right after we did a press release on the fact that the city had appealed, and I said, "Sure, yeah, that'd be great." And so it wasn't actually the guest host, because he told me, "Yeah, I'm supportive of what you're doing. This is great, blah blah blah." So, but it was his co-host that jumped in. It was interesting because, we did kind of what we've done, some back and forth factual, this is what's happened. This is what we're asking for. I talked about the ordinance that we're proposing. And then this guy's like, "Well, I just have to tell you, Mike, I completely disagree with what you're doing here." And, and then he launched into the whole thing. You have no expectation of privacy in public places. You're trying to hamstring our police. The court system is going to protect you, which I wish I had thought of this at the time. If the court system is going to protect me and the court system is now twice told the police to give up the documents, then okay,
Yeah. But, so it seems like he's right. The court system is protecting you, but that's made him more angry.
Yeah, obviously.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was the gist of it. And his basic point was that, we're hamstringing the police. The police need to have this technology. They need to operate it in secret because bad guys are out there and the bad guys are going to get you. And besides, you don't have any expectation of privacy in a public place. That was his argument. So, we went back and forth a little bit, and it got a little bit heated, but I've been on radio enough where I'm pretty good at keeping my cool and just kind of coming at the facts. And in my head, I'm thinking, how can I get at this guy? How can I get at this guy? Because that's, mm-hmm. radio interview 101, control the conversation. So here's the tack that I took, and it worked perfectly because it just so happened that the dude has a daughter. And I said, let me ask you, how would you feel if I walked around the park and followed your daughter everywhere she went and filmed her? "Oh, well, that would be weird. I would be really suspicious of what you're doing, And he got a little bit, I pushed him on it, and he got a little bit emotional about it because, mm-hmm. I have a daughter. I'd be pretty pissed off if some weird dude was following her around with a camera everywhere because, but it's in public, right? No expectation of privacy in public, right? Not doing anything wrong, right? Mm. So then it went to break. Kind of left it hanging out there.
Yeah.
So we come back from break, and the host, who, was the guy that said, "I'm supportive," he goes, "I got to tell you, Mike, I agree with a lot of what you've been saying." And he tossed a softball question out there. So, he's kind of trying to divert the thing. So I answered his softball question and immediately pivoted back. And I said, "Look, here's the point that I was driving at before the break. I was making the point that we all, at some level, believe in privacy. We all mm-hmm. value privacy. There may be different levels of which but all of us have some certain intuitive feeling that privacy is an important thing.
Sure.
The fact that you don't want me following your daughter proves that point. At some level, surveillance becomes creepy, and it doesn't change just because somebody has a badge and a uniform." And then I said, "I know that this is predominantly a conservative, right-wing leaning audience. That means that you guys believe in limited government, right? That means that you believe that power is easily abused and it should be checked. Why does that always change when it comes to the police? I said the police are government employees. They're just as prone to abusing their authority and their power as anybody else. We should have these basic levels of transparency and oversight on police just like we would on any other government agency. And then it went right to the hard break. It was beautiful. I got the last word. Praise be to me.
Well, that's such a great point to reiterate. I think with a lot of your quote unquote average people, a lot of people who, not that they don't have a dog in the fight, but that they don't care. They're busy. They're trying to earn a paycheck and pay their bills. Most people don't care about a lot of things. Most people don't vote. But I think most people don't like the tax man, right? Like most people don't like the IRS. Right. I think most people don't like the DMV. And they think it's really long waits and it's crappy. But most people, people will get the joke of a stand-up comedian who says, "Hey, how about that DMV?" They get the joke.
Exactly.
So why is it that people think somehow mysteriously, a government employee under a different sector is somehow magically going to be different than all of these other public employees in all of these other sectors that they all mutually agree, yeah, man, they kind of suck. We have them. I don't really like them. I think it could be done better. But somehow, it's almost as if people magically don't think the police are state employees. Like they know they are, but they don't classify them as such simply because we all generally we certainly do in the libertarian community, but I think a lot of conservatives and even liberals for that matter have had dealings with public servants and said, wow, they were crap, and they somehow don't consider servicemen that. Why is that?
Brainwashing?
Yeah.
I don't know. That's I think it's part of the package. You have packages that you buy into when you're into the political left-right, Republican, Democrat, blue-red paradigm. And part of the red package is that we respect my troops and we respect my police. And and I tell people this all the time. I feel like with We See You Watching Lexington, you might not believe that listening to me on this forum, but we take a very, I think, centrist, reasoned approach. We're not saying that you can't have your surveillance toys. We're saying that they should have oversight and transparency. I don't say any reasonable person can object to that, and yet they do. And I also want to touch on another thing that I just think is absolute crap, is this whole, well, if you don't have anything to hide, then you don't have anything to fear. That's bullshit. Yeah. People say it all the time, but nobody believes it. Nobody really believes that, because when you push them, like I did following the guy's daughter around the park, then all of a sudden the story changes. I got a post on the We See You Watching Lexington Facebook page today from some guy who I suspect is a cop. I don't even think he's from Lexington, and it was the same kind of thing. You're trying to hamstring our police and blah 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 blah. So I go look at his Facebook page. It's all private. Like he didn't even have where he lives.
Yeah. So,
and he gave me that, if you don't have anything to hide, well, then why is your Facebook? Because you believe in privacy, you dumbass. That just drives me crazy. I get so sick of that trope, because it's not true. Everybody believes at some level in privacy, and when they say they don't, they're lying.
Yeah.
Well, one thing that I don't know if I've even said this on the show before. I'm not hiding from it. I'll say it right now. It doesn't bother me. You know me. I say lots of funny things. Is I genuinely believe that the overwhelming majority of people have no principles. And when you say that, now you're gonna start some fights when you say that statement, because people will get their dander up and say, "What are you trying to say about me? You saying that I don't stand for anything?" I'm like, "Well, yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying." Because I try to help people understand that if you're the type of person, like you're a moderate, you call yourself a moderate or whatever. There's a lot of people who will call themselves a moderate. There's a lot of people who will consider themselves to be, well, I'm a reasonable thinking person, and and for every different individual issue, I'm going to look at all of them specifically one at a time, and I'm going to fall on one side of the issue or the other, and that makes me a reasoned thinking person. And I say, well, maybe, but the cool thing about having principles is that your principles principles help guide you in matters like this. And and you already brought up the really good one about limited government, that you're directing this at the conservative base, which is half the country, or whatever, 48% of the country. And you're saying, look, if you're conservative and you're a small government, limited government conservative, that's what you think you are.
Yeah.
If that's what your principles are, if you had any, then you wouldn't have to put a lot of thought into this particular case, because you would just know, well, I mean, pretty much by default, I'm going to side with the individual in this case because I'm wary of surveillance. I'm wary of government overreach just as a principle. And then, I believe in having to get warrants in order to get information and to surveil people and things like that. Again, I don't think I've said anything outlandish or off base in that statement at all. I would think that that's what being a conservative or limited government is supposed theoretically to be. But the thing is that none of those people have any principles, so they don't make the connection from one issue to the next.
Yeah, absolutely. And you spend about 15 minutes going through the 10th Amendment Center emails and Facebook comments and stuff, and you learn that very quickly of how few people really, really believe in the Constitution like they say to you. I'm a constitutional conservative. Wait a minute. You're going to criticize Trump for bombing people? It's okay because of reasons.
Yeah.
No. If you believe in the Constitution says you get a declaration of war. It's not complicated.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I really think that I think people, instead of having real solid principles, like these are my guiding philosophical principles, they have packages. I'm a blue team package, or I'm a red team package, or I'm a moderate package. That's a thing too. And so they have all of these little things that are in this box that they're supposed to believe in. And I'm, we can sound like we're being mean. This was me. 10 years ago, this was me. I was the little red box, and I believed in limited government except for the military.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's easy to fall into that because that's how we're programmed. And I've really made a conscious effort over the last 5, 6, 7 years to try to say, okay, what do I believe, and how do my other beliefs line up with what I really believe foundationally? And I really wish more people would do that.
Yeah. Well, that's
important to do that.
Blake is right. It's hard. It's one of those things where I don't want to talk about 100 different subjects, but if there's one thing you're definitely not going to learn in public schools, it's principles.
Yeah,
and what that, and it's not just having them, because I wouldn't want a school to tell a kid what their principles should be. But it's understanding what principles, what that means, what that is, and that's a good thing, and that again, I'm not trying to tell people I want you to determine what your principles are, but it's so much easier to work with another rational thinking person. Their principles may be different than mine, but if I know they have those principles, then I don't have to ask them what their position is on every subject, and then we can debate from there.
Sure.
But if you have no principles, then my God, whichever way the wind blows that week, whatever subject may be the topic du jour of the media, or the 24/7 news of that particular day or week, God only knows what they're going to say about it. I mean, one that we've brought up on this show a number of times is the life argument. Like, I don't really want to get into a topic about abortion, more so than I'm talking about the principle of, it's amazing to me, and I know that there's people at home right now. I've actually had, you want to talk about getting weird messages. Look, I don't have a big program, but we've started to grow over time, and we've started to get some more feedback and things. And I have a guy who I would consider a friend of mine. I'm not going to name him on air, but he comes from the right. He's definitely a textbook right conservative type guy. Right. And he has said to me, Alan, I think I agree with about 99% of everything you say on the show, but it seems to me like you really go after the right way more than you go after the left. And I said to him, look, man, the reason, you're probably right, I do. But there's two reasons for that. One, it's that, quite frankly, I think the modern left is like just irredeemable, so I just don't bother. It's like, good luck to you, sirs. Let me know how that works out in Venezuela.
Yeah.
But the other reason is that I admonish people from the right more because they're the people more likely to stand up on their pulpit and say, I'm a principled conservative and I believe in the Constitution and limited government. So, or I'm pro-life. That's what I was getting to in this one.
Yeah.
I'm pro-life. So that if you label yourself as a pro-life Christian conservative and then you're not anti-war, you're a piece of shit.
Boom. Amen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I concur with that. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I mean, I totally agree with that, having been that. But
Me
I'm
too.
not a piece of crap, I promise.
Guilty.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it takes so much for you to get to that point. I mean, one of the things I've learned from you is just really work on my principles and know what they are. Because he's right. So many people go through life, you just don't have a foundation of what are your principles. You got to know them, guys.
Well, I would, if people ask me what my political, I tell people I'm a libertarian, but I'm an anarchist. I'm one of those anarchist libertarians that you don't want in your political party because I'm not going to vote anyway. So what difference does it make?
Right.
Yeah. But the thing is, what I try to tell people is that, I'm really at peace with being an anarchist, an anarcho-libertarian, or anarcho-capitalist, or whatever you want. I'm really at peace with that. I'm really at peace with having those principles, specifically because if Mike calls in and he says, Alan, did you see Fox just said that so-and-so did such and such, what do you think about that? Is that I already know what I don't have to delve into it for the next weeks and months to determine an answer. I know.
It's interesting because you hit on something really important there. Having principles is peaceful.
Yes.
When you know your principles, you can be a peaceful person, and that's cool.
Unless your principle is regime change in the Middle East, then you won't be a principal.
Right.
So
spreading democracy.
But at least within your own self, it's peaceful to you.
So Mike, I wanted to get your thoughts on one more thing before we run out of time. We had talked about this briefly right before we went on air. I feel like we have to mention this just because it's a big issue right now. There's a lot of deplatforming going on when it comes to social media. Now, I definitely have my issues with Facebook. We had discussed on the show recently where we just had to do the whole thing where if we want to post our show on Facebook, we have to sign up with them and give them all this personal information because they have to know what political organization we represent and all this garbage and nonsense. And I don't like that. I wish there was a better alternative, but at the same time, I'm trying to spread the message. So it's like, I'm gonna eat that bullet so that I can try to get the message out there.
Exactly.
But some people that we would like and that are our friends, our most recent guest, Scott Horton, Daniel McAdams, who's the president of the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity. There's one other, Peter Van Buren was another one. It's specifically, and I know there's some meme pages like Anarchy Ball recently got hit. I know Eric July is always off and on a 30-day ban, just depending on what day of the week it is, what length of his ban is. But there's a lot of people that are really troubled that A, that it's happening, and B, it definitely seems to be maybe we're certainly everyone's biased, right? But we're certainly biased. But it seems to be that a lot of people that are very particularly anti-war, a lot of people that are particularly anti-establishment. I don't use that phrase a lot, but these are certainly anti-establishment voices. They seem to be getting silenced on social media at a significantly higher clip than, say, traditional left or right wing.
Yeah, I think that's true, and the whole thing is troubling to me. That's the word I would use. Troubling. Sounds so sophisticated. I'm troubled. But in all seriousness, it's not just. I mean, we could talk about. There's a lot of different issues you can get into. First Amendment. We could talk about the difference between government censorship and the private sector censorship and whatnot. But I think, to me, it goes down to a deeper issue that I find very disturbing, and it's a societal thing, where I think we're beginning to see a coalition or a collusion of people that are quickly advancing to potentially being a majority of people who are comfortable with the idea of we need to silence ideas and opinions that we don't like. And so we're going to use the mob to silence those ideas and those speeches. And I've got a buddy that's he's kind of on the left, and he posted this little cartoon, and it was this whole, this is not a First Amendment issue. It's just the community saying that you're an asshole and nobody has to put up with assholes and blah, blah, blah. And I just messaged, or not messaged him, I just commented. I said, that's cute until you're the one that the mob decides they want to silence.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what's frightening about this. Right now it's and to me it's particularly troubling because I think I mentioned this before the show. I feel like I'm about 1 degree of separation from being deplatformed myself, because I'm anti-establishment. I'm saying things that the powers that be aren't going to like, and the lefties aren't going to like it, and then a lot of the right wingers aren't going to like it either. So let's get rid of this Mike Maharrey. He'll shut him up. And there's a lot of people that are going to say, well, if he's saying things that are that horrible, then we need to shut him up. I think that's a bad tendency in society. The left talks about we should be tolerant. We really should be tolerant. And what tolerant means is that when people say things that you don't like, or even things that are extremely offensive, you say, you know what? That's a bunch of crap. You might even debate that person or put out your own message, but you don't say, I'm going to hit that guy and figure out a way to shut him up. And that's what we're moving toward in this society. And I think that's a dangerous precedent. And, we can get conspiratorial. All of a sudden it's these anti-war voices. I think the establishment on both the left and the right would like to shut up the anti-war people. So, I just think it's a societal issue too, more than anything. We can get into the nuts and bolts of it, but I think we are in a dangerous place when the mob decides that it has the right to silence opinions and ideas and viewpoints that it doesn't like.
Yeah, but it's also, it's not just the mob thing, but it's major corporations like Facebook and
that's the tool.
That's the tool. And when they go and they ban things, it's not the First Amendment that's happening here. This is corporations. Right. Corporations don't have to have a First Amendment. They don't have to answer to that when it comes to their product or their outlet. So it's kind of a double-edged sword.
Well, there was a post by Jeffrey Tucker. I love Jeffrey. I love reading his articles. And he had posted just recently. It's always funny to hear people complain about Twitter on Twitter, and it's always funny to see people complain about Facebook on Facebook. I'm not making fun of them. I'm actually saying it's legitimately funny to me because I always think, you're making yourself a target. Like you'll get reported and then you'll get banned, and they'll say, well, look at you, you're talking, But he had actually posted, because I know he's not a fan of Facebook. So he's had more problems with Facebook than Twitter. Scott and the gang had more problems with Twitter than Facebook. But I mean, it's two sides of the same coin. But he had basically made a post on Twitter where he said, as far as I'm concerned, Facebook's been nationalized. Like they might as well, because kind of touching on what Blake was talking about for a second, that I'll let you do the funny voice because you're better at the funny voice than me. But I know there's a lot of libertarians out there that are saying, well, those are private companies, so they can do what they want with their property. That's what we believe, and that's true. Although we would also argue from the crony capitalist standpoint that a lot of these mega corporations and big companies that have such a huge presence and influence in the marketplace and in the country, they didn't get that way as honestly as they would like to admit. They got that way with a lot of backroom deals and favors from government and state intervention and picking favorites and that sort of thing. So all of a sudden, I guess the argument could be made that if you're a crony capitalist and you were able to reach the summit that you've reached through gaming the system, through deals with politicians, then you might as well be nationalized, because I don't really consider that purely a private property issue anymore.
Yeah.
Right. I think here's the thing, I go back to the mob analogy because it really is like a mob. Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh, I'm outraged, and so we're going to do something. And if you've ever watched a mob, pretty much whatever the mob comes up on becomes a weapon. Rocks in the street, dumpsters, garbage cans, whatever it is, the mob can use it as a weapon. Mm-hmm. And so the mob is going to use whatever weapon it has to do its job of silencing speech. So it's going to use the corporation, it's going to use the government, it's going to use whatever tool is at its disposal, doxing people or even showing up at their house and intimidating them. Mm-hmm. So again, I really think that the problem is the mob. And these weapons, no matter, whether it's government. And here's the thing, people say, well, it's not a First Amendment issue. How long is it? If the mob really gets the momentum, and we as a society really begin to accept there are certain things you cannot say and there's certain speech that doesn't deserve to be heard, how long is it going to be before the government is involved in that? I'd say about 13 seconds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if it's not a First Amendment now, it's going to be. And I really think we need to address the mob. And I don't know how you do that. I mean, mobs get a momentum of their own, and I'm not sure that we're
They
past
have
the
another
point of
word
no
for
return.
mob. It's democracy.
Yeah. Well, but I think so. I would tie that back to, you're right. It's really the mob is the society is the issue, not because I mean no person of power ever got there without the mob, right? Like I mean they have to have people to respect their authority in order to have it. But it comes back to these people don't have principles, and because I would argue that the same people who will, they'll dox someone, like I'll use you as a perfect example. I mean, what stops the police union from sending out an emailer to everyone on their list saying, "Hey, go on Twitter and report this guy because he's threatening the police," which is bullshit. But it doesn't matter because they're in that camp and they'll say, "Oh, well, it takes me 2 seconds. I'm going to click on this. I'm going to click report and say he's threatening," and then all of a sudden you get a message saying that you've been banned from Twitter because you've been reported as being an unsavory character. I mean, that's exactly how it happens. Yeah. But the point I'm going to make is that these unprincipled people, which is most people, I would argue, the overwhelming majority, is that these same people who will kick you out of the public sphere because they have no principle for free speech. They don't give a shit. They don't care about free speech. Now, but don't get me wrong. If Barack Obama's speech was threatened, those same people would stand up on the pulpit of the First Amendment and say, "Well, if you have any respect for the Bill of Rights and the First Amendment, you understand his speech is protected." Which is correct. Yeah. When they're right, they're right. Yeah. The problem is that everyone knows you and I will not be afforded that same principled outburst from the right or the left when our day comes. The last thing I wanted to say real quick, and I'm going to give you the last word, is everyone's heard that cliche of, when they came for Mike Maharrey, I didn't say anything because I wasn't Mike. That whole little spiel. Like, I think sometimes in the same way that we complain about, say, the left, and we say, well, you can't call everybody a Nazi because when you do, first of all, you just sound like an idiot, and two, the words lose their meaning, and so now you're just left looking for a harsher word for the actual bad guy because you called the non-bad guys Nazis. So what's an actual bad guy? I think when you use these cliche phrases, even and then for people in our camp too, when you use these cliche phrases, like here's some of my pet peeves. People who say, "What's the libertarian position on this?" Everyone who ever types that, I block them on Facebook. I'm just letting you know. If you've ever typed that, I blocked you. You don't know that, but I unfollowed you. And the reason is because you can't think for your damn self. Mm-hmm. The second thing is that people that will say that phrase of, "Well, they came for Blake, but I didn't say anything," because everybody who says that, I block them because, again, it's like you're using that phrase as, I mean, I guess I'm happy that you're outraged, but it's like now, like today, you're outraged about Chick-fil-A. Like, that's what got, like, you weren't outraged about unconstitutional wars and millions of dead and,
Federal Reserve ruining your money.
Yeah, like, you weren't outraged about any of that. You weren't outraged about the surveillance in Lexington, but by God, they're going to boycott Chick-fil-A. Well, I'll eat there twice. like I just, like, it's just like, so I block those people, and so I caution people, I guess is what I'm trying to say, is that, for one, I understand we live in an outrage culture. There are certainly things to be outraged about. Absolutely. But I want your anger to be well placed at the correct sources, and I really desperately urge people to consider what their principles are, because they may find out that there's going to be some uncomfortable moments. They may find out that, I've decided that this is my X is my principle, but that doesn't jive with the position I once had. But that's okay, because this is one thing that I've never agreed with when it comes to poking and prodding politicians, is that if a politician changes their mind, they're a flip-flopper, right? So if your opponents will say, "Well, look at Mike, he's a flip-flopper." Now, when I consider flip-flopper, I consider that going back and forth several times.
Right.
I consider someone who, if you were pro-choice yesterday, and then you've thought a lot about it and done a lot of soul searching, and you've decided, you know what, I'm actually pro-life, and maybe I have different than traditional reasons, but I am. That's what I am now, and because I was wrong, and I've made amends. If you were pro-Iraq war, and then you've decided, you know what, that was a huge boondoggle, it was a massive mistake, it was a failure. I've changed my mind. I'm now going to be anti-war in the future because that was wrong. That's good. We should applaud people who have those changes of heart. But for the folks who, like I said, the people who just whichever way the wind is blowing, or the exact same issue, but depending on whose ire the mob is after that particular day, I have
weather fan.
Yeah, I have no time for you. I have no time for these people.
That's right.
Boom. I agree.
Okay. Well, there you go. That's the only reason we bring you on is to say, Alan, you're right. Well said. That's why we have you on.
And I think I'll give you an example. I mean, if in the deep dark reaches of the internet somewhere, I guess if you could, operate the way back somewhere out there, there's a blog where I basically regurgitated military press releases. That existed. I deleted it, but I'm sure out there somewhere in the Neverlands of the internet that existed. And I'm kind of embarrassed by that at this point because full-blown supporter of the Iraq War, especially the first one, Gulf War I, man, that was awesome. Shock and awe, baby. Woo.
Yeah.
But I did. I've over the last several years, I really have had a change of heart about that, and have become where anti-war is probably my number one top issue. And I think I'm you can say Mike Maharrey's a flip-flopper. I would say I'm very proud of that because I feel like that I have evolved in a positive way. Yeah. Like you said, the people that drive me crazy are the emails that I get from the people that are mad at me because I'm criticizing Trump for using executive orders when they were cheerleading me when I was criticizing Obama for using executive orders. And the only reason they've changed their position is because Trump's their man. That kind of thing just absolutely, those are the people I don't have any use for. If you are more concerned about your guy than you are about whatever principle it is that you held, and you're going to flip-flop on the principle depending on which guy is in power, or gal, to be or can I say gal? I don't know. I get really confused.
See, it's
about
funny.
The words
You were trying to be politically correct, and in doing so, you've actually offended a whole other audience of people.
We're all going to get deplatformed.
Yeah.
But so I don't even remember what I was saying. I think I was probably done.
Well, I think the last thing I'm going to say to your point, because we're running super long, to your point is that I think what bothers me the most about the same old people who will vote in that one election and then vote in the next one and then vote in the next one. If we just vote harder this time, things will be better, even though they're voting for the same people. They're voting for the same people. Is that you would think. I know I'm being naive when I say this. You would think that when they defend their guy, hell or high water, but then their guy flip-flops and is now championing the exact opposite position, and yet the overwhelming majority of his base just magically changes positions. Like, isn't it such a coincidence that like 50 million people all changed their position on that issue that day?
Yeah.
Boy, isn't that weird?
Yeah.
That's so weird.
Yeah.
So again, these people have no principles.
Right.
So here's the moral. I'm going to sum up this show.
Okay.
Sum up the show.
Some of the show.
Quit spying on me and get some damn principles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's the title of the show right there.
That's
You're
right.
welcome.
Get some damn principles.
Yeah.
Now, if we could just upload it to a server that you have, so that you can just do the whole thing for me. You just upload it, tag it, the whole thing.
I got my own pile of stuff I got to do, man. You do your own. You do your own homework.
So again, for people at home, Facebook.com/TGS Alan Mosley. Twitter at Alan M. Mosley, but we'll get deleted eventually. Website is thegoldstandardpodcast.com. For reference of everything we talked about in today's show and Mike's lawsuit with Lexington is WeSeeYouWatchingLexington.com. So sign up to that email list. You can check out the references to the letters, the different updates we talked about in today's show. If you can find him on Facebook, I know the Facebook link is there on his website. Yeah. Go on that Facebook, leave a little message of encouragement. You know what? We'll play their game. If you see some random thin blue liner on there saying, "Mike, you're a monster," just find his profile and say, "Hey, you're a retard." Just do it. And you know what? Tell them I said it was okay. Tell them Alan said it was okay. Mike, thank you so much for being here, man.
Thanks for having me. I love being on the show. It's great. I love both you guys, and appreciate what you do.
Thanks, buddy. We will see you next week.